Rusty Patch Bumblebee Foraging Methods and Conservation Techniques in St. Paul, Minnesota by Jenna Scull. This video is a shorter version of a conference presentation that was given in Madison, Wisconsin on April 27, 2019 at the Midwest Undergraduate Geography Symposium. Why is bee conservation important? Bees play an important role in every food chain, including our own. Bees pollinate crops that we enjoy every day. They are also a crucial species in a variety of trophic cascades and interactions, and they are known as a keystone species that would have many significant negative ecological impacts if they were to go completely extinct. They are ultimately essential for a healthy environment. It is important that urban bee conservation be made a priority while taking into account bee habitat utilization, foraging and nesting needs, and construction of suitable habitats that would support natural populations in urban areas. This first source is from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and it explains the survey protocols for the rusty patch bumblebee. They provide in-depth information on survey techniques and how they should be used in specific areas. This study determined new rusty patch bumblebee locations, if the bee is still apparent in previously documented locations, monitored the long-term population trends, and provided conservation recommendations for areas that are unoccupied by the rusty patch bumblebee. The small red zones are areas of high potential of the bumblebee, and the yellow zones are areas of current primary dispersal. The light green zones are areas that used to be primary dispersal. The abundance has decreased 87% in the rusty patch bumblebee since the late 1990s. The habitat range has drastically diminished due to habitat loss and degradation, intensive farming, disease, pesticides, and climate change. The rusty patch bumblebee is endangered, and the species is so imperiled that every existing population of them is crucial in the existence of the entire species. Understanding the science of bees is important in how we use bees and in modifying and optimizing our conservation techniques for them. A few things that are specifically important to understand are bee behavior and foraging techniques, so the way we conserve them is as effective and efficient as possible. Like I mentioned before, bees play a very important role in most food chains, including our own, and they maintain a very close relationship with humans whether we realize it or not. In order to understand the foraging techniques a little bit more in detail, I did some research and found a few journal articles. This first one is a landscape scale study of bumblebee foraging range and constancy using a harmonic radar that was actually attached to the bees. The study was done to determine what kind of foraging patterns the bees had as they flew to and from their nests to forage. Results found that bees do not necessarily have to forage close to their nest, and they are able to travel far and wide distances in order to pollinate. However, they typically forage within 1 kilometer of their nest and disperse within 10 kilometers of previous colonies. Understanding the spatial relationship between bees' nests and their foraging areas is crucial in efficiently planning the conservation and management of bees as pollinators. This next journal article did a study on the foraging behavior of honeybees and bumblebees on cranberry. This journal talks specifically about honeybees versus bumblebees and their foraging techniques on cranberry, but the behavior of the bumblebee can be related to the rusty patch bumblebee. They observed the bees over a 3-year period on a commercial cranberry bog as they foraged on cranberry flowers, and their activities were noted. Bumblebees were found to almost always hold on to the petals with their legs, while the body was held below the reproductive parts of the flower. Bombus finis was specifically found to forage at the base of the flower, which seems to be a less effective way to collect pollen than the other bees who were studied. This is known as buzz pollination, which is worth approximately $3 billion per year in the United States. So the main research question we're looking at is how can we use the foraging and nesting techniques of the rusty-patched bumblebee to create sufficient habitats that will support and promote natural population growth in St. Paul, Minnesota. In order to do this, I used GIS to find areas in St. Paul that were hot, poor, and near high priority bee habitats. The hot areas refer to areas that are currently paved or without green space, and the poor areas are to potentially create an area of nature in a community that doesn't get a chance to experience it often. The areas in black are the places best suited for the creation of the new bee habitat. I then focused on this specific area in St. Paul known as the Urban Growler neighborhood. This neighborhood is known as the Urban Growler neighborhood. Within this area, potential gardens were identified that would connect the current rusty patch bumblebee habitats as seen in yellow. A linkage map was ran in the ArcGIS program in order to identify how exactly the bees move across the landscape between islands of habitat. The linkage map takes into account friction of distance and gravitational pull of the two islands of habitat. The green areas are where it's easiest for the bees to move, and the red areas are where it's most difficult. I then selected 10 out of 67 potential islands that would make 3 gardens. These gardens are in an area of best bee movement and would promote connectivity of the current habitats due to its north to south direction. This next source is also from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and it recommends in-depth conservation management techniques for the rusty patch bumblebee, which is heading quickly toward complete extinction. The rusty-patched bumblebee needs 3 main things: nesting habitat, floral resources to gather pollen and nectar, and an overwintering habitat. Connecting patches of high-quality habitat is said to be the most effective way of conservation as long as it is constantly managed. This figure is from the Xerces Society and contains some general management recommendations for bumblebee conservation based on season. You will need flowers that bloom from early spring to late fall, and the diversity among the flowers is important as well in order to provide a variety of pollen and nectar sources for the bees. Those that are native are better than non-native. You will need to plant the flowers close together and use no pesticides in order to keep populations of bees flourishing. For their habitat needs, timed mowings are necessary as well as some areas left unmowed, specifically for overwintering habitat. Things like loose soil, fallen leaves, and proximity to water is also beneficial. After doing further research to prove that floral resources for bees are actually beneficial to their survival, I came across this article. A diverse floral resource was planted in an urban area in California to attract local, native California bee species to assess patterns of diversity and seasonality. As shown in Table 1, numerous amounts of bees were recorded, some native and some non-native. This experiment shows that urban gardens do have the potential to be important in the conservation and management for native bee communities if they are built with the needs of bees in mind. To offer up a few smaller-scale solutions that could be done at home, you could start by planting a small pollinator garden in your backyard. Even a few types of flowers could attract some bees and provide the pollen they need. You could also limit or completely avoid the use of pesticides. This will also help promote natural bee populations in your area. And lastly, you could spread the word. Get your friends, family, or community involved in a pollinator garden in your neighborhood to help save the bees.